Before the world knew her name, before movements and marches and laws, she was just a woman with ordinary dreams. She dreamed of independence, of building a career, of walking freely through crowded streets, of living without asking permission. She believed life was difficult, but fair. She believed effort was always rewarded. She believed her body would always obey her will. That belief ended on a quiet, ordinary day. The accident came without warning. Metal screamed, glass shattered, and time slowed into something cruel. When she opened her eyes, the ceiling above her was unfamiliar. White lights burned her vision, and pain spoke louder than fear. Doctors stood near her bed, their faces careful, their voices heavy. They told her the truth gently, but truth does not soften pain. She would never walk again. At first, the words meant nothing. They floated in the air, disconnected from reality. She tried to move her legs. Nothing happened. She tried again and again. Panic arrived, then silence. In that hospital bed, her future collapsed all at once. Not just her legs, but her plans, her identity, her sense of worth. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. She watched the world move without her. Visitors came less often. Friends did not know what to say. Some avoided her eyes. Others spoke too loudly, as if disability also stole intelligence. Pity replaced respect. At home, the challenges multiplied. Stairs became walls, bathrooms became battlegrounds, simple tasks became exhausting negotiations. She hated asking for help. Every request felt like failure. Society reminded her daily that she was now different. People stared, people whispered, people assumed her life was over. She began to believe them. Nights were the hardest. In darkness, her thoughts attacked. What value do I have now? Who will hire me? Who will love me? Who will listen? She mourned the woman she used to be, the woman who walked without thinking, the woman who took space confidently. Pain lived in her body, but shame lived in her mind. Doctors focused on survival. Family focused on comfort. No one talked about dignity. No one talked about purpose. She felt invisible, as if the world had erased her future. One evening, while scrolling endlessly online, she saw a video. A disabled woman speaking fiercely, unapologetically, demanding access and equality. Not begging, not explaining, demanding. Something stirred inside her. She realized something dangerous. She was not alone. There were millions like her, hidden in homes, ignored by systems, silenced by shame. Their pain was individual, but the cause was collective. In that moment, her suffering changed meaning. Pain stopped being punishment. Pain became information. She started observing why buildings had no ramps, why employers rejected disabled applicants, why disabled women were treated as burdens, why policies spoke about them but never included them. She began writing. At first privately, journals filled with anger and clarity. Then publicly, small posts, honest words. She spoke about isolation, about dignity, about how disability did not remove ambition. At first, reactions were slow. A few likes, a few comments. But then messages came. Women who had never spoken publicly, mothers of disabled daughters, girls who thought their dreams were invalid. They said the same thing. I feel seen. Her voice grew stronger, her fear weaker. She learned that silence protects injustice and speaking invites change. She was still afraid, but fear no longer controlled her. She realized something powerful. Her body was limited, but her voice was not. That realization marked the true beginning, not of recovery, but of rebellion. Pain does not arrive loudly. Sometimes it settles in quietly and waits. For her, the days after the accident blended into one long shadow. Morning and night lost meaning. The wheelchair beside her bed became a symbol of everything she feared. Not because it confined her body, but because it revealed how quickly the world withdraws love when ability disappears. Friends visited less, phone calls slowed, invitations stopped entirely. She noticed how people spoke around her, not to her, around her. They talked about her future as if she were no longer present. They used gentle voices, heavy with assumptions, as though kindness required lowering expectations. She tried to smile, tried to appear grateful, tried to prove she was still herself. But inside, something was breaking and reforming at the same time. Her mother helped her learn the routines of survival, how to transfer from bed to chair, how to dress differently, how to ask for help without sounding apologetic. Each movement required patience. Each task demanded courage, not because it was physically difficult, but because it forced her to confront a truth no one prepared her for. Disability does not only limit the body, it exposes the limits of society. The first time she went outside in the wheelchair, people stared, some with curiosity, some with discomfort, some with pity that felt heavier than judgment. Children asked honest questions. Adults avoided eye contact. The ramp at the grocery store was broken. The bus driver sighed before lowering the lift. The office building she once worked in had no accessible entrance. Every obstacle whispered the same message. You were not expected to return. That night, she cried alone. Not because she wanted to walk again, but because she wanted to belong again. She began writing in a notebook, at first only to release frustration. Words spilled without structure or intention. She wrote about the stares that blocked her life. She wrote about people who spoke slowly to her as if disability reduced intelligence. She wrote about fear, about anger, about invisibility. Writing became breathing. Weeks passed, then months. Her body learned new limits, but her mind refused to shrink. One evening, she read something online, a comment under a news article about disability access. Someone wrote, "Why should we change everything for a few broken people?" The sentence struck her harder than the accident ever had. Broken? She closed the laptop and stared at the wall. For the first time, she realized that silence was not protecting her. Silence was allowing lies to survive. That night, she recorded a short video on her phone. No makeup, no preparation, no script. She spoke about that comment. She spoke about how disability was not brokenness, how the world was designed for only one type of body. Her voice trembled, but she did not stop. She posted the video and went to sleep. By morning, the video had thousands of views. Messages poured in from disabled women who had never spoken publicly, from parents who did not know how to help their children, from teachers who admitted they had failed their students. She felt fear, then responsibility. She realized her pain had given her something powerful: perspective. She started posting regularly. Short videos, long reflections, stories of everyday barriers people never notice. She did not speak as an expert, she spoke as a witness. Her honesty became her strength. Criticism followed quickly. Some accused her of exaggeration. Some told her to be grateful she was alive. Some said she was spreading negativity. She read every comment. The supportive ones gave her warmth. The hateful ones gave her clarity. She saw patterns, the same excuses, the same dismissal, the same refusal to listen. Instead of retreating, she leaned in. She began researching laws, learning statistics, understanding how systems exclude not by accident, but by design. She connected with disability rights activists across the country, many older than her, many tired, many burned out. They welcomed her voice because it was fresh, because it was fearless, because it came from lived experience. She attended her first advocacy meeting in a community hall. The microphone was too high, the stage had steps. No one had considered accessibility. She asked calmly for adjustments. The room shifted. For the first time, people were forced to confront what inclusion actually requires. She spoke that day about dignity, about access, about disabled women facing double discrimination. When she finished, the room was silent. Then applause filled the space. She returned home exhausted, but alive in a way she had not felt since before the accident. This was not healing. This was transformation. Her online following grew, so did expectations. People began asking her to speak for them, to represent them, to lead. The word leader scared her. She had never planned to build a movement, she had only wanted to be heard. But she understood something crucial. Movements are born when personal pain meets collective truth. She created a small online group, a space for disabled women to share stories without fear. Stories of abuse, of unemployment, of being treated as invisible. She read every message, cried with strangers, celebrated small victories. Each story added weight to her purpose. She no longer asked, "Why did this happen to me?" She asked, "What can this create?" By the end of the year, her voice was no longer alone. It echoed through hundreds of voices joining together. The silence that once confined her had shaped a voice strong enough to challenge a nation. And this was only the beginning. The first time she went live online, her hands were trembling. Not from fear of speaking, but from years of being unheard. She positioned the phone carefully on a stack of books. The room behind her was small and ordinary. A plain wall, a window letting in afternoon light. Nothing dramatic, except her truth. She looked into the camera and spoke slowly. "My name does not matter today. What matters is what happens to disabled women when the world looks away." Her voice cracked once. She did not stop. She spoke about being denied entry into buildings, about being spoken over in meetings, about being treated like a responsibility instead of a citizen, about the way strangers praised her for surviving instead of asking why survival was so hard. She did not ask for sympathy. She asked for accountability. When the video ended, she felt empty, as if she had poured everything out and left nothing behind. She assumed a few friends might watch it, maybe a relative or two. By morning, the video had crossed 10,000 views. Comments flooded in, some kind, some cruel, some painfully honest. A girl wrote, "I am disabled and I thought I was alone." Another said, "My sister stopped dreaming after her injury. Thank you for giving me words." There were hateful comments, too. "Why complain? Be grateful you're alive. Stop playing victim." She read them all. Instead of breaking her, they sharpened her resolve. She realized something important. Silence had protected the system, not her. Speaking out was dangerous, but silence was deadly. She went live again the next week. This time, she was prepared. She shared stories sent to her privately. A woman denied a job because customers might feel uncomfortable. A student forced to study from home because the school had stairs and no elevator. A mother whose disability was used against her in court. These stories were not rare. They were routine. Viewership doubled. Local journalists began messaging her, asking for interviews, asking for statements. She said yes to all of them. Her first interview was on a small digital news channel. The host asked, "Do you think you're exaggerating the problem?" She smiled calmly. "If truth sounds exaggerated, it is because you have not been listening." The clip went viral. For the first time, the conversation shifted from charity to rights, from inspiration to injustice. She created a simple hashtag. Access is not kindness. People started using it, posting photos of broken ramps, closed doors, dismissive signs. The hashtag became a mirror, reflecting a reality many had ignored. She received an email from a university student. "I want to help, but I do not know how." That question stayed with her. She realized awareness alone was not enough. People needed direction, structure, a place to belong. She named the movement. Not loud, not dramatic, just honest. The Open Path Collective. The idea was simple. Every person deserves access. Not later, not as a favor, but now. She built a small team, volunteers who reached out to her online, students, teachers, designers, parents of disabled children. None of them were experts, but all of them were committed. They held virtual meetings, listening before planning, mapping barriers before demanding solutions. They created free guides, how to make events accessible, how to advocate at local councils, how to support disabled employees. The movement grew quietly, without funding, without political backing, just people and purpose. Then came the first test. A city announced a new public transport project. Millions spent, zero accessibility. The Open Path Collective wrote an open letter, clear, firm, respectful. They requested a meeting. The city declined, so she did something unexpected. She showed up. Wheelchair, camera, volunteers beside her. They stood outside the municipal building, not shouting, not blocking, just standing. She spoke to the camera. This building represents public service, yet it is not accessible to the public. Passers-by stopped. Phones came out. The live stream spread. A council member stepped outside, uncomfortable, defensive. She asked him one question. Can you explain why my taxes built a building I cannot enter? There was no good answer. By evening, the video was everywhere. The city released a statement, promising review, promising dialogue. It was not victory, but it was movement. The Open Path Collective gained credibility, not as activists, but as citizens demanding fairness. More people joined. Local chapters formed. Different cities, different stories, same struggle. She trained leaders, encouraged others to speak, refused to be the only face. This was bigger than her. Late one night, she sat alone, exhausted, overwhelmed. She wondered if she was strong enough, if her body could keep up with her vision. Then she opened her messages. A mother wrote, "My daughter saw you and asked me if she can be a lawyer one day." She cried. She understood then. The movement was no longer optional. It was necessary. Her pain had started as isolation. Now it had become connection. She didn't know how far this path would go. She only knew she could not turn back, because a spark had been lit, and a spark shared becomes a fire. The movement entered a season where visibility turned into resistance. Crowds were larger now. Attention was sharper, and opposition finally showed its face. When power feels threatened, it always reacts. Local officials began calling her dangerous. Media panels questioned her credibility. Some said she was being used. Others said a disabled woman should remain grateful, not demanding. She listened. She absorbed. She did not retreat. Every attack taught her how deeply the system feared change. She understood something critical. Empathy alone does not move nations. Pressure does. So she shifted strategy. Instead of only telling stories, she started building structure. She created training circles for disabled women, teaching them how to speak publicly, how to document discrimination, how to organize safely, how to protect their voices. Women joined from villages and cities, from schools and factories, from homes where they had been hidden for years. They did not come confident. They came cautious, but they left transformed. Each woman became a messenger. Each messenger became a leader. The movement multiplied quietly, like roots growing underground before breaking concrete. She met lawyers who volunteered their time, architects who offered accessible designs, journalists who promised honest coverage, doctors who spoke against medical neglect. For the first time, disability was not discussed as charity, it was discussed as rights. Then came the first national march. Thousands gathered. Wheelchairs, crutches, white canes, hearing devices, parents, children, elders. They marched slowly, but with undeniable force. The streets had never seen anything like it. People watched from windows. Some clapped, some stared, some felt uncomfortable. That discomfort was necessary. She spoke from a raised platform, not above the crowd, but among them. She did not shout. She did not beg. She spoke like someone who knew history was listening. She talked about stolen opportunities, about girls locked indoors, about dreams denied before they were named. She spoke about strength that grows inside pain, about leadership born from survival. The march ended, but the echo remained. Government offices could not ignore it. Corporations could not dismiss it. Schools could not pretend. Meetings were scheduled, committees were formed, promises were made. She attended every table, not alone anymore, surrounded by women she once trained. They entered buildings that once rejected them. They spoke policies in rooms that once excluded them. Change was slow, painfully slow. Some promises were delayed, some ignored, some broken. She learned patience without surrender. Then came the backlash. Anonymous threats arrived. Funding was questioned. Permits were challenged. She received warnings disguised as advice, suggestions to soften the message, to slow down, to compromise. She refused. She understood compromise often means silence, and silence had already stolen too much. The pressure affected her health. Long nights, constant travel, emotional weight. There were days she wanted to rest, days she felt tired beyond language. But then messages arrived. A girl admitted into school, a woman hired for the first time, a ramp built where stairs once blocked life. These messages became her medicine. She reminded herself, movements are not built by comfort, they are built by endurance. She began mentoring younger leaders, preparing them to lead without her. She did not want a movement dependent on one voice, she wanted a system that could survive generations. Regional chapters formed, local leaders took charge, campaigns adapted to cultural realities. The movement no longer belonged to her, it belonged to the people. That realization was both beautiful and heavy. She had planted something that no longer needed permission. As national elections approached, politicians reached out, some sincerely, some opportunistically. She met them all, asked the same questions, demanded the same commitments: access, employment, education, dignity. Some walked away, some stayed. The ones who stayed helped pass the first inclusive policy bill. It was not perfect, but it was a beginning. When the bill was announced, she sat quietly in her room. She did not celebrate loudly. She cried, not for herself, but for the girl she once was, for the woman told her life was over. That woman had built something unstoppable. Part 4 closed with the truth she now lived by. Pain can shape you, but purpose decides who you become. And the nation was only beginning to feel the shift. By the time her movement reached its 3rd year, it was no longer a whisper or a plea. It was a presence. What began as one woman speaking from her wheelchair had transformed into a living, breathing force that cities could feel. Her name was now spoken in meetings she was not invited to. Her words were quoted by people who once ignored her. Her ideas were debated by leaders who had never imagined listening to someone like her. But power brought new pain. The same society that once pitied her now tried to control her. Organizations approached her offering funding with conditions. Politicians offered support in exchange for silence on certain issues. Media outlets wanted her story polished, softened, and made comfortable. They wanted inspiration without disruption, hope without change, a disabled woman who smiled and thanked the system instead of challenging it. She refused, and refusal has consequences. Supporters began to receive threats, venues canceled events at the last moment, volunteers were pressured to step away. Anonymous messages flooded her phone, warning her to stop. Some nights she sat alone, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had pushed too far. Her body was tired, chronic pain. By the time her movement reached its third year, it was no longer a whisper or a plea. It was a presence. What began as one woman speaking from her wheelchair had transformed into a living, breathing force that cities could feel. Her name was now spoken in meetings she was not invited to. Her words were quoted by people who once ignored her. Her ideas were debated by leaders who had never imagined listening to someone like her. But power brought new pain. The same society that once pitied her now tried to control her. Organizations approached her offering funding with conditions. Politicians offered support in exchange for silence on certain issues. Media outlets wanted her story polished, softened, and made comfortable. They wanted inspiration without disruption, hope without change, a disabled woman who smiled and thanked the system instead of challenging it. She refused, and refusal has consequences. Supporters began to receive threats, venues canceled events at the last moment, volunteers were pressured to step away. Anonymous messages flooded her phone, warning her to stop. Some nights she sat alone, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had pushed too far. Her body was tired, chronic pain never left her. Every long day ended with muscles burning and joints screaming. Yet the movement did not allow her to rest. Thousands depended on her courage. Millions watched her choices. So she made the hardest decision of her life. She stopped trying to be liked. She embraced being feared. Her speeches changed. No longer gentle explanations, now they were demands. She spoke directly to institutions. She named discrimination without apology. She challenged corporations publicly. She confronted lawmakers face to face. And something remarkable happened. People responded. Not everyone supported her, but everyone paid attention. Disabled workers shared stories of being fired. Women spoke about abuse hidden behind dependency. Children told of schools refusing them entry. Families revealed the shame forced upon them. Her movement became a mirror society could not look away from. Local chapters formed across the country, each led by disabled women, each shaped by lived experience. They organized legal aid, they trained advocates, they taught people how to demand access, not beg for it. For the first time, disabled women were not waiting for permission, they were taking space. Marches filled streets. Wheelchairs moved together like waves, crutches rose like banners, voices echoed where silence once lived. She watched from the front, not as a leader above them, but as one of them, equal, unprotected, unapologetic. The pressure reached the government. Committees were formed, hearings scheduled, policies reviewed. She was invited to speak, not as a symbol, but as a threat they needed to manage. She entered those buildings with the same wheelchair once denied entry. Security guards stood uncertain. Officials shifted uncomfortably. The room expected gratitude. They received truth. She spoke of statistics and suffering, of budgets and bodies, of laws that existed only on paper. She reminded them that accessibility delayed is dignity denied. Her words were broadcast nationwide. That night, something changed. A country that had never discussed disability openly was now arguing about it. And in that argument, her movement grew stronger. But victory was not yet hers, because the greatest battle was still ahead, the moment when change becomes real or collapses under resistance. and she knew the system would not surrender quietly. Part 6 will show how the backlash intensified, how betrayal came from within, and how one decision almost shattered everything. The movement had grown larger than she ever imagined, and yet every day brought new challenges. Every speech, every meeting, every rally demanded strength she did not always feel in her body, but she carried in her spirit. She could feel the eyes of doubters following her every step, from the moment she entered a room to the moment she left. She knew the world still judged her for her disability, yet she refused to let their doubt define her. The women she had inspired had become her army, a network of voices demanding change and justice for all disabled women across the nation. They called her their leader, their guide, their fearless voice, and she carried that responsibility with humility and determination. Every morning, she woke up early before the sun touched the city. She practiced her speeches, she reviewed notes, she studied policies, and she wrote letters to politicians who had ignored the voices of the disabled for decades. She knew that change was not only about speeches and protests, but about careful strategy, about understanding systems that had failed women like her, about navigating bureaucracy and turning resistance into opportunity. Her wheelchair carried her body, but her mind carried the weight of an entire movement. She had learned how to negotiate with officials, how to push for laws, how to ensure accessibility and inclusion in every space, from schools to hospitals to workplaces. The media began noticing her movement. She appeared on television, she was interviewed by newspapers, she shared her story on online platforms, and her words traveled across cities and villages. Women who had hidden their disabilities or had been silenced by shame now found courage in her story. Her pain had become their hope. Her story had become their manifesto. She held workshops in community centers, teaching women how to advocate for themselves, how to demand equal opportunities, and how to challenge the stigma that had defined their lives. She emphasized education, employment, accessibility, and self-respect as the pillars of change. Every rally she attended was met with resistance from people who did not understand or did not care. They shouted insults, they questioned her capability, and yet she remained calm, composed, and unwavering. She transformed anger into motivation. She transformed rejection into strategy. She transformed every obstacle into an opportunity to educate, to inspire, and to lead. She trained volunteers to document every public space that was inaccessible, every workplace that discriminated, every school that excluded, and used this evidence to demand reforms. She knew that numbers mattered and facts mattered, but most of all, she knew that human stories mattered, and she collected thousands of them, creating a powerful archive that could not be ignored. Despite her growing influence, she faced personal challenges. Her health fluctuated, she often experienced pain in her back and limbs. She endured sleepless nights managing the movement and handling bureaucracy. She faced skepticism even from some allies who doubted whether a woman in a wheelchair could lead a national campaign. Yet she never let these doubts shake her. She surrounded herself with people who shared her vision, people who were willing to fight alongside her for equality, for justice, and for dignity. She built a leadership team of women who were disabled, who had experienced discrimination firsthand, and who understood the urgency of their mission. Their collective energy became unstoppable. She began meeting with lawmakers. She presented petitions. She gave testimonies in parliamentary committees. She highlighted the plight of disabled women who were denied education, jobs, and health care. She emphasized that disability was not inability and that society needed to remove barriers rather than expect women to overcome impossible odds. She spoke about her childhood, her accident, her struggles with mobility, and how society's indifference had fueled her determination. Her story moved lawmakers. Many were inspired, some were skeptical, yet the movement could not be ignored. The voices of thousands of women had grown too loud to be silenced. Meanwhile, her online presence exploded. She started a platform where women could share experiences, where stories of resilience were amplified, and where people could learn about disability rights. She used videos, blogs, webinars, and social media campaigns to create awareness. She partnered with NGOs and international organizations to gain support and credibility. The movement that had started from her bedroom had now become a national phenomenon. Her name became synonymous with courage, advocacy, and empowerment. She received letters from young girls saying they wanted to follow her path, they wanted to speak out, they wanted to refuse to be invisible. But with growth came conflict. Internal disagreements arose about strategy, priorities, and approaches. She faced criticism from some leaders who wanted faster results, others who preferred slower, bureaucratic channels. She navigated these conflicts carefully, maintaining unity while insisting on the core mission. She encouraged open dialogue, ensured that every voice was heard, and reminded everyone that the goal was not personal power, but collective liberation. She continued to travel to remote towns, teaching disabled women to advocate for themselves and to demand public services, access, and recognition. Every journey was physically exhausting, yet she persevered because the faces of women who had finally reclaimed dignity reminded her of the stakes. She realized that the movement had reached a critical point. It was no longer just about her story, it was about creating a sustainable system that would protect and empower disabled women for generations. The campaign for legal reforms, accessibility laws, and social recognition had begun to gain traction. Politicians who had ignored the voices of the disabled now had to engage. They could no longer dismiss the movement as a single woman's cause. It had become a national demand for justice, equality, and dignity. The fire that had started as personal pain had transformed into collective power. And as she looked at the thousands of women attending her events, reading her blogs, following her social media, she felt a quiet satisfaction. She knew the hardest battles were ahead, yet she was ready for them. She had turned her suffering into strength, her silence into voice, and her challenges into opportunity. She was no longer only surviving, she was thriving. She was no longer only inspiring, she was creating change that could not be reversed. Her journey was far from over, yet it marked a turning point where personal resilience became national activism, and where the story of a disabled woman became the story of a generation, demanding that pain be recognized and transformed into power for the greater good. The momentum of the movement was unstoppable, and yet the challenges grew larger every day. Political opposition increased as some lawmakers saw her influence as a threat and tried to undermine her efforts by spreading rumors, questioning her capability, by dismissing the legitimacy of the movement, and by attempting to divide her followers. But she remained calm, composed, and strategic. She knew that every attempt to weaken her resolve could be transformed into an opportunity to educate and mobilize. She held secret meetings with her team to discuss strategies. She prepared detailed proposals, and she reminded everyone that the mission was bigger than any individual or any obstacle. Every setback became a lesson, every criticism became motivation, and every doubt became fuel for action. Her public appearances became more frequent. She traveled to multiple cities in a single week, giving speeches, attending conferences, organizing rallies, and meeting women who had been inspired by her story. She saw mothers crying as they shared the struggles of raising disabled daughters. She heard stories of girls being denied education, of women being excluded from workplaces, and of families hiding members with disabilities due to shame. She listened to each story with patience and compassion, absorbing their pain and transforming it into policies and programs that could create real change. She emphasized that advocacy was not about anger, but about persistence, knowledge, and solidarity. And she trained volunteers to approach every challenge with clarity and purpose. Her public appearances reached new heights. Interviews, television shows, and social media campaigns amplified her message. She became the face of disability rights in the nation. Her words were quoted in newspapers, her speeches shared across platforms, and her personal story became a symbol of resilience. Millions now knew her name, millions of women now felt represented, and millions more began questioning the way society treated disabled individuals. She emphasized that change required more than awareness. It required legislation, implementation, and social acceptance. And she worked tirelessly to ensure that every initiative had measurable impact, from accessible schools to inclusive workplaces to public transportation reforms. Behind the scenes, she faced constant fatigue. Her body ached from endless travel and long meetings. Her mind was stretched by complex negotiations, and her emotions were tested by the stories of suffering she carried. Yet she found strength in the faces of the women she helped, in the letters she received, and in the growing network of activists who shared her vision. She reminded herself daily that pain could be a teacher and that challenges could be a catalyst for transformation. She organized workshops to train future leaders to continue the mission, ensuring that the movement was not dependent on a single individual but could sustain itself for generations. The opposition became more aggressive. They attempted legal hurdles, they questioned funding sources, and they spread misinformation campaigns. Yet she responded with transparency, accountability, and resilience. She documented every interaction she had with authorities, every achievement, every challenge, and used this evidence to strengthen her position. She built alliances with international disability rights organizations and human rights groups, and these alliances added credibility and pressure on local authorities to acknowledge the movement and take action. She became a master at diplomacy, balancing assertiveness with negotiation and vision with pragmatism. Her team grew stronger and more confident. They organized awareness campaigns in rural areas, urban centers, and schools. They partnered with educational institutions to provide scholarships for disabled girls. They worked with corporations to create inclusive hiring practices. And they pressured governments to implement accessible public infrastructure. Their collective effort created momentum that could not be ignored. The movement that had begun with a single voice now had thousands of spokespeople and millions of supporters whose lives were directly impacted by the reforms being implemented. She faced moments of doubt, moments when exhaustion threatened to consume her, when criticism felt unbearable, and when progress seemed too slow. Yet, she reminded herself of the lives depending on her. She visualized the faces of young girls in wheelchairs attending school for the first time, women walking into workplaces with confidence, and families feeling proud instead of ashamed. She transformed her emotional vulnerability into empathy, which became one of her greatest strengths because it allowed her to connect deeply with every individual she met and to inspire loyalty, dedication, and trust from her followers. Partnerships with policymakers began to yield tangible results. Laws were proposed, amendments were debated, and social policies were being reformed. She gave testimonies at parliamentary committees, she submitted evidence-based reports, she presented statistics and human stories side by side, and she refused to leave a room without ensuring her recommendations were recorded and considered. Her advocacy was relentless because she knew that systemic change required persistence, courage, and meticulous attention to detail, and that the smallest reform could create ripple effects that would transform the lives of thousands of women across the nation. As the movement reached critical mass, she began organizing a national summit, bringing together disabled women activists, educators, policymakers, corporate leaders, and media representatives. The summit was a landmark event. It was the first time so many voices demanding equality and accessibility were united under a single banner. Her speech at the summit was electrifying. She recounted her childhood struggles, her accident, the pain of societal neglect, and the transformation of her suffering into power. She challenged attendees to commit to concrete actions to ensure that accessibility, education, and employment opportunities were available to all disabled women. She emphasized that the fight was not about over until no woman had to hide her disability or be denied her rights. The summit garnered international attention. Her story was shared globally, her advocacy model became a blueprint for other nations, and her movement gained recognition as a national force for change. Her ability to transform personal pain into collective empowerment became the defining narrative of her leadership. Her wheelchair was no longer a symbol of limitation, but a symbol of resilience, leadership, and unstoppable determination. She had turned exclusion into inclusion, invisibility into visibility, and despair into hope. And her influence continued to grow exponentially with every passing day. The stage was set for the final victories, reforms, and recognition that would mark the movement as a historic turning point. The groundwork had been laid, the allies mobilized, the opposition challenged, and the voices of millions were now demanding change. Her story had evolved from personal struggle into national transformation, and the final chapter was about to be written, where justice, equality, and empowerment would triumph, and the legacy of one woman's courage would redefine the future for generations of disabled women. The final chapter of her journey began not with celebration, but with responsibility, because she understood that true victory was not applause or recognition, but lasting change. She stood at the center of a movement that had reshaped national conversations, policies, and attitudes toward disabled women. The same nation that once ignored her now listened carefully to every word she spoke. Government halls that once lacked ramps now welcomed her wheelchair. Media that once framed disability as weakness now framed it as leadership. Her presence itself had rewritten narratives. Major legislation was finally passed. Laws guaranteeing accessibility in public spaces, inclusive education policies, employment protection for disabled women, healthcare access, and national funding for disability support programs. These were not symbolic victories. They were structural transformations that altered the lives of millions. Implementation committees were formed, and she was invited not as a guest, but as a decision maker. Her recommendations shaped national standards and accountability mechanisms, ensuring that reforms were not only announced, but enforced. When she signed the final documents alongside lawmakers, she felt the weight of every woman who had suffered silently for generations. She remembered the nights of pain, the isolation, the humiliation, and the moments when she questioned her worth. She understood then that none of it had been wasted. Her pain had been the price of transformation. Her body had endured limitations, but her vision had rewritten possibilities. Across the nation, schools opened their doors to disabled girls who were once turned away. Workplaces redesigned offices and redefined hiring practices. Transportation systems became accessible, and healthcare facilities implemented inclusive protocols. Families who once hid their disabled daughters now celebrated them. Communities began seeing disability not as a curse, but as a form of human diversity, deserving dignity, respect, and opportunity. She continued traveling, not as a protester, but as a builder, mentoring new leaders, helping regional chapters grow, and ensuring that rural areas were not left behind. She established a national foundation dedicated to disability leadership, education, and policy advocacy, ensuring that future generations would not have to fight the same battles. She insisted on training disabled women as lawyers, policymakers, educators, and activists because she believed representation was the most powerful form of justice. Recognition followed: awards, national honors, international invitations, and global platforms. Yet she remained grounded. She refused to let praise distract her from the mission. She reminded audiences that movements are not built by heroes alone, but by communities willing to stand together. Her speeches shifted from resistance to responsibility, from demanding rights to sustaining them. She urged young leaders to protect what had been achieved and to continue pushing boundaries. In private moments, she allowed herself to reflect. She acknowledged the grief for the life she once imagined and the gratitude for the life she had created. She accepted that healing does not always mean restoring what was lost. Sometimes it means transforming it into something greater. She had not walked again, but she had taught a nation how to move forward. She had not erased her pain, but she had turned it into purpose that would outlive her. Her story was included in textbooks, her movement studied in universities, and her leadership model replicated in other countries. Disabled girls grew up knowing her name not as a victim, but as a founder, a reformer, and a visionary. Mothers spoke of her as proof that their daughters' futures were not limited by bodies, but shaped by opportunity. In her final address at the National Assembly, she spoke not about herself, but about the future. She said that true inclusion is not charity, but justice, that disability is not inability, but diversity, and that societies are measured not by how they treat the powerful, but by how they empower the marginalized. Her words echoed across the hall and into the lives of millions. As the chapter closed, she returned to the small room where her journey had begun, not to mourn the past, but to honor it. She looked at the walls that once held her despair and now reflected her legacy. She smiled, not because the struggle had ended, but because the path forward was clear. Her pain had become power. Her silence had become a movement. Her story had become a nation. And long after her voice grew quiet, the system she built continued to speak, ensuring that no disabled woman would ever again be invisible, forgotten, or denied her place in the world.